Look! Look, the dynamic duo!
Hey guys, welcome to the Dynamic Duo. I'm Franz.
I'm Kevin. Welcome back to the Batcave in Avengers Tower, everybody.
Kevin, this is going to be a fun topic because we've been talking about this. Truth be told, we just talked about Kirby and Stan Lee, and it brought up the generational differences between characters and the industry and comic books in general. And it's a fascinating discussion to me, and certainly I love you know what you've said to me, and I wanted you to share some of it. What's your general thought on comic books from a generational point of view, from an approach point of view, from a storytelling point of view, from a characterization point of view? What's your thought?
Already, you've opened Pandora's box. I still collect comics. I still love comics. I still do the I'm not worthy kind of thing when it comes down to, interacting with artists and writers when I meet them at conventions and all that kind of thing. It's still part of me. But a major difference is when I was a kid and I read comics as a kid, they were big time enjoyment. You had your adventure factor, especially for the superhero stuff, and they were a lot of fun. And somewhere over the decades, and I know things in all forms of media change. I'm very aware of that. I mean, music has changed, television has changed. The print media in general has changed. That's not lost on me. But I think at some point, and I have an idea of when it happened, comic books begin to suffer because even with heavier or dark subjects, they almost got too dark. There were the fun element of, man, did you when I would talk to my buddies in the neighborhood and we were trading comics back and forth and talking about them all the time, they were fun. There were elements of the books that were fun, even as I said before, even with darker or heavy subjects. I remember, the big controversy with, Crisis on Campus for Spider-Man that dealt with, the drug culture in the 60s. I remember the big controversy that popped up in the special issue that was done relating to Speedy using drugs in the Green Lantern, Green Arrow issue, and they walked in on him shooting up. Of course, these are not laughable subjects. These are things that the creators felt needed to be dealt with, and they did. But in some context, and you've touched on this a number of times, comics have lost their way. They're not really that much fun anymore. Normally, if you pick up an issue, you know you're going to be dealing with something that is beyond what I consider the normal scope of entertainment. And I'm not saying that everything has to be kiddified. I'm not talking about that. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. But comics were initially set up as entertainment for kids and teenagers. And somewhere along the line, the different artists and creators that were taking over, the writers, etc., they simply decided, and pardon my French, but to hell with the kids. the hell with the teenage market. We're just going to do this because we've been given a contract. And I want to see somebody's body ripped in half just because I can draw that on the pages of a book. I want to hear adult language on the pages of a book because they told me I'm going to get paid. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not enough. That truly, that's not enough. They've ruined the industry in a certain sense. I'm not picking on anybody. I don't necessarily want to vilify any particular artist or writer, but I can tell you, and I will say this much: the primary change happened with this when 3 books happened. One, the introduction of Spider-Man's black suit and the symbiote. 2, the whole idea behind Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. 3, the other thing that changed it, flat out, was Alan Moore's The Killing Joke. And allow me to throw one more in the mix. The other one that did change things was the death of Jason Todd in Batman for Death in the Family. That's my take on it.
Beautiful. You know, we've been talking about the industry. We've been talking about Stan Lee. And here's the way I look at it. Prior to Stan Lee starting with Marvel, comic books were done a certain way. The focus was a lot of horror, which brought up the comics code and brought up a lot of controversies. Then there was obviously superheroes taking place. The Justice League was already there, selling moderately to a few people. And Stan Lee came and said, okay, let's do it this way. Again, some people may disagree with that Stan Lee came, but this is the way I choose to frame it because this is the way I like to think of it. It's an important distinction. It's an important thing because the fact of the matter is Stan Lee came and things changed. Whether he did it or didn't do it, the fact of the matter is that Stan Lee got involved and things changed. And what was important about Stan Lee? What was the difference? And the difference was to say, we are going to write comic books. We're going to write comic books from 5-year-olds to 95-year-olds. And this is a very interesting point of view. It's a very interesting approach. What does that mean to write for a 5-year-old and a 95-year-old, a 50-year-old, a 30-year-old, a 60-year-old, a teenager, 14, 15? That combination, that magic was so beautiful, was that it was able to capture the imagination of a 5-year-old, but meet the level of sophistication of a 50-year-old. I can tell you now that I've experienced that gamut, okay, Kevin? I read comic books when I was 5 years old, and I'm reading comic books as a 50-year-old. And I'm reading the original material. And I'm telling you that I find greater sophistication as an adult, and we can have that discussion all day long, in a 1960s Thor comic book, in a 1960s Fantastic Four comic book, than I do in the stuff that's being done today. More sophistication. So that approach was a very, very powerful approach because it satisfied my childish, being impressed by blowing things up and cool stuff happening. And it also satisfied my intellect, even as a child, which in ways that I didn't even understand. That vision persisted, my friend. It persisted in the 60s. It persisted in the 70s. And it persisted in the 80s until the mid 80s when something very dramatic happened. Another, atomic bomb explosion. And I agree with you. that there was an atomic bomb explosion. And that atomic bomb was called The Dark Knight Returns. The Dark Knight Returns. And I differ with you a little bit. For me, it's The Dark Knight, it's Watchmen, and it's, you know, the new wave of artists that changed the industry. Now, here's the problem. Comic books and superheroes were, let's be honest, a point of shame for us. For those of us who grew up reading and collecting that stuff, it was a point of shame. Our parents said, stop reading that crap. Our friends looked at us funny, like, bro, you read comic books? Like, you know, don't you want to smoke a cigarette, even though you're 10 years old? You know, everybody was trying to be adult. The girls that we were trying to date, the last thing that we wanted to do is say, hey, listen, we read comic books, because it was a point of shame for us. And so we did it because we were collectors. We did it because we got it, but we kind of were ashamed of it and a little bit of ourselves, right? We were like mutants trying to hide who we were. Until The Dark Knight Returns. The Dark Knight Returns maturized the industry and legitimized us. Because for the first time, The Dark Knight, a comic book, was being mentioned in Rolling Stone magazines, and it was being looked at as, oh my God, this is great. And for the first time, we could say, hey, mom or brother or whoever, you want to read this? This is this good. That started changing our mindset. And not only that, but we were also maturing as, you know, our ages were getting older. Now the generation of comic book people were getting into their teenage years, anywhere between 13 to 25, right? And so when we discovered The Dark Knight, we were like, oh my God, this is it. This is the way to go. Because it legitimizes us, it makes us proud, and it also meets our intellectual maturity level, okay? So we started looking for other things, and we found them in Alan Moore's books. Alan Moore was another genius master who was producing great adult-themed comic book material, from Miracle Man to other characters like that. And when he did Watchmen, it was like, oh, you know, the dam burst, essentially. When he was doing Swamp Thing, it's like, oh, now we're legitimate. And so the industry started to change to meet that demand. But several things were happening at the same time. It's fascinating because several things were happening at the exact same time. And they were contradictory things. By the end of the 80s and early 90s, Stan Lee was taking less of a direct approach. And his vision, as I said earlier, was less imposed. And he was getting to be the old man in the room that whose opinion didn't want to be, you know, it wasn't valid anymore, except for the fact that his opinion was absolutely freaking right, okay? Don't get me started. So the other thing that was happening was that the artists and the creators were becoming more important than the characters. You see, in the 70s and in the 80s, John Byrne was a popular artist. He was hot. George Perez were popular artists. They were hot, but they were hot because of the material that they were producing, okay? They were bringing Spider-Man to life. They were bringing the X-Men to life. They were bringing the Teen Titans to life. By the early 90s, it was different. When McFarlane and Silvestri and those guys came into play, Eric Lawson, Rob Liefeld, they became the star. They became the star more so than the character. And so now you've got adult themed comic books, and then you have popular artists, right? And it was like, what do you want, Mr. Popular Artist? What is your vision? How do you want to interpret Spider-Man? How do you see the Fantastic Four? And we started losing the Fantastic Four on that basis. But keep in mind, there was also the Dark Knight. And so how do we mix these two things? The sort of infantile comic book approachy, you know, artwork and sophistication. And they confused it into a quote unquote dark approach, which is what you're talking about. And suddenly comic books, maturization was interpreted as dark and gloomy. and every freaking character became dark and gloomy and murderous. And they started to want to outdo each other with their dark and gloomy stuff. Lord have mercy. There were comic books, to me, it wasn't the black costume that ruined Spider-Man. It was the storytelling that came since. It was the Craven Final Hunt story where Spider-Man is freaking buried in a coffin. Like, it was just getting, and suicide and Jesus, the Clone Saga became really dark. So now we're losing the characters. The genre is becoming extremely dark, not mature, not sophisticated, but just dark. And another thing, because of the popularity of the artist, because their interpretation became more important than the characters themselves, guess what? Oh, it didn't matter what Thor looked like. He could look like this. Or the freaking Invisible Woman could have a costume like that, because it didn't matter. And because of I'm sorry, there are a lot of factors, and I'm not even going to get to all of them. I'm not going to get to the publishing. I'm not going to get to all the things that impacted the industry, that collapsed the industry, and that's still affecting the industry today. So on the one hand, you've had comic book artists, and at that time they were drawing females in a very sexualized way, and all of a sudden that was a thing too. Then you had the dark approach. Then you had the popularity of Wolverine. Wolverine became a popular character, and everybody wanted to be Wolverine. All of a sudden, we had to have Punisher, because why? They misinterpreted, they misunderstood. They thought Wolverine was popular because he was mean or because he was a killer, and so they said, "Oh, duh, let's make everybody a killer." Just like they said, the Dark Knight was successful because it was dark. No, it wasn't. The Dark Knight was successful because it was a great book. Wolverine was successful because he was a great character. It wasn't because he was a killer. And so they wanted everybody to be killers and mean. They wanted everybody to have sexy, revealing outfits. They wanted the whole industry to be dark, like the Dark Knight. They wanted artists to be the superstars. They reinvented with Heroes Reborn. It started then. It started then. Never mind that they were taking advantage of comic book fans who were buying the material. And so they were coming up with all kinds of stupid gimmicks to sell us the same book 3 times over, and convinced us that it was going to be worth $1 million by now, which none of it is worth a dime. So all these factors that were taking place collapsed the industry. Again, let me remind people, it's when Stanley's vision started to get away. Let's just remind people of that. There was a resurgence, but the resurgence was done in the most horrible way possible. When Joe Quesada, and I will call out the names because Joe Quesada is terrible to me. When Joe Quesada, Michael Bendis, Mark Millar took over, I appreciate their intention. I really do. I really do appreciate their intention. And their intention was, hey guys, listen, we're proud of this stuff. Let's bring this stuff forward in the best way possible. Mm-hmm. Let's really take it seriously, and let's give it our all, and let's present Spider-Man and Fantastic Four and the Hulk and all these other characters in the most mature, sophisticated way. Let's take it, quote unquote, seriously. Here is what they missed in that equation. They missed Stan Lee's equation of 5 to 95. And they went straight to the 50. So comic books, as I believe, which artist, was it Ron Frenz or Sal Buscema said to us, instead of comic books, they started making storyboard for movies. They were doing movie storyboards.
Yes. And
in making movie storyboards, 2 things happened. The material got too mature. It wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't tapping into the 5-year-old and me. It continued to be dark because they continued to assume darkness sells because darkness is mature, which it's not. Right? Darkness does not equate maturity.
I couldn't agree with you more. You're hitting the nail on the head.
And it continued to betray the characterizations of the characters. My friend, by the early 2000s, the Hulk was no longer a character. We couldn't identify, we cannot identify the Hulk. We cannot identify Thor. And so it got so bad that they created the Ultimates. The Ultimates was, okay, 616, listen, let's do it better. Let's reinterpret this. Let's stop trying to fix what's not exactly good. Let's reinvent it. Let me retell you the X-Men stories. And Kevin, I promise you that at the time, as a young person, I recognized, whoa, what are you doing? You're destroying the X-Men. And if you think you're as genius as Chris Claremont, you've got another thing coming. If you think you're smarter than Stan Lee and Jack Kirby with the Fantastic Four, you're out of your freaking mind. But my friend, that thing lasted for a decade, the popularity of the freaking Ultimates. And people were demanding that we do away with 616 and completely replace it with Ultimate, not recognizing that it was a flash in the pan. Okay, now the Ultimate series doesn't even exist anymore because it didn't have the gravitas, the magic, the thing that the freaking originals had. And so what they did, which is even more criminal, and I'm blaming Quesada and Michael Bendis and all these other fools for it, is they took the Ultimate philosophy and brought it to the 616 universe. Mm-hmm. And so now comics are completely lost. They're lost. Spider-Man does not exist. There isn't a Spider-Man. Wolverine, it's like there's so many versions of these characters, so many interpretations that there is no connection anymore. The Hulk, literally, I don't even know what's happening with the Hulk. He's some sort of immortal Hulk. He was a teenage Hulk. He was a Conan the Barbarian Hulk. Who knows? Thor. And now another thing that happened, forgive me for going on, another thing that happened is they wanted to match their success. And the only way they could do it is by copying the success of the past. Dark Knight, I talked about the Dark Knight. I talked about Wolverine. Another thing that was greatly successful was Crisis on Infinite Earths. And we've had the opportunity to talk to Marv Wolfman about that. And so they were like, oh, let's replicate Crisis on Infinite Earths. So everything is a life-shattering event. Every other comic book. These crises, these reunions, these group reunion books, they were happening once every decade. Then they started happening once every 5 years or so. Then it was once a year. Now every single storyline is a end of the world team up, Marvel team up. And comic writers are lazy, my friend, because forgive me, this is the last thing I'm gonna say, but they're relying on the gimmick now. You know how comic books writers think? It's so lazy. Let's say you hired me to do Spider-Man. Here's how they think. They think, you know what would be interesting? What if we made Aunt May the villain? All right, here's an idea. The whole thing was because of Aunt May. And let's say Aunt May killed Peter's parents, and she was responsible for killing Uncle Ben Grimm. She was responsible for killing Uncle Ben. And she gave as a way to expect, and then they take that idea and they dismiss Aunt May, they dismiss the history and say, oh, let's go with that. And comic books are made up of those freaking storylines. I'm so sick and tired of these types of extreme, what if Lois Lane was this, or what if Superman became dark? It's right now, the regular comic books are a bunch of what if comic books being brought to light. So forgive me for venting, but that's how I feel about it. That's where I
am. My brother, you have said a mouthful. If I can just add to this very quickly.
Please.
Although you have brought up a number of the points of view from different people, and especially from the Marvel point of view, I want to add two quick things. One, even with the success of the original print for The Killing Joke, the book was phenomenal. It still sells to this day. But you want to know something funny about the presentation for it on the other side? when they decided to animate that book and turn it into a movie, most people hated it. They went a little too far with certain aspects of what the book was really about, and certain elements just did not belong in the story. And it took away from other things that should have remained in the story and weren't. And one of them primarily was the whole idea of Barbara Gordon having sex with Bruce Wayne / Batman. That turned off so many people that most folks were like, "No, this doesn't work."
I remember
Because it wasn't even a part of the original idea for the Killing Joke. It didn't have anything to do with it. That came from somebody at DC Comics that decided, okay, you know, Barbara Gordon, the way that we've drawn her and the way she is, and the way that Tara Strong does her voice, it's sexy. We got to have some sort of a pseudo sex scene in here, and it turned people off. Again, why did it turn people off? Because they stepped away from the source material. Yes, The Killing Joke is an incredibly dark book. Yes, the Dark Knight Returns, it's incredibly dark. Those books are not meant for kids. But that's why so many people said no. And I want to point out one other quick thing. I said that I would only make 2 quick points. Years ago, while at a Baltimore Comic-Con, I was able to sit down for a few minutes and talk to Neil Adams. And Neil Adams, to me, is the equivalent of Stan Lee for DC. He really is. I worship Neil Adams' work as if he's a god. I love Neil Adams' work. The only other person that I think is even close to what Adams has done is Ron Frenz.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
But when I was talking, pardon me, when I was talking to Mr. Adams, I asked him, because his work on Batman specifically, it makes me feel like I'm 10 again, or 12 again, reading his original works. I just love his Batman approach, but that's neither here nor there. The thing is, I asked him, and this was at least 3 to 5 years ago. I asked him, what was wrong with Batman, in his opinion, and how could it be fixed? His direct answer to me was, they've lost the character. He flat out said to me, because he'd kind of gotten to know me a little bit, which was one of the reasons why he agreed to have the little bit of a one-on-one with me at the table. For one thing, I got lucky, nobody else was there, but that's neither here nor there. But I had talked to him in previous years when I had gone to Comic-Con, so he recognized me. And he looked at me and said, "My young friend, they've lost the character." And he flat out said, "Kevin, I don't know if they're ever going to get him back to where he was."
Absolutely.
The damage may have been done far too long and far too early.
Absolutely.
And I have never forgotten that.
Shout out to my brother Ralph. And my brother Ralph always misunderstands my point of view, in the sense that he has concerns that, frankly, I've always had, and I agree with him, but he doesn't seem to appreciate that I agree with him. And you're absolutely right. We have to remember that once upon a time, there were certain characters that were very popular that we can't remember anymore. Superman was popular in the 30s, and he's still popular today. But Doc Savage, the Shadow, the Phantom, characters like that, they have come and they have gone.
Yep.
Okay. And there's a reason why these characters have gone. It's not always the same reason, but there are reasons why they are no longer relevant. And there's a reason why Superman is relevant. And right now, we are at risk of destroying this set of characters, from Superman to Spider-Man to all the Marvel, superheroes and all the DC superheroes. And the reason is because of what Neil Adams said, because of what Sal Buscema said, and some other people. John Romita Sr. has said that to me. You are losing the character. And if you think it's easy to make a Batman, if you think it's easy to make a Spider-Man, if you think you can just take the Hulk for granted, and as long as you call him the Hulk, he will be popular, you're making a vast mistake. Right now, the only thing that's keeping the industry alive is the remnants of the original stuff. The power of the original stuff was so powerful. That nuclear reactor was so strong that the remnants of it, the waves of energy, are still keeping it afloat. But without that, it collapses because it's not good enough. Mm-hmm. It's simply not good enough. And so we are running the risk that when that original source, which is us, that generation, once we die off, then those books will go by the way of Doc Savage, because there is no characterization. It's not easy to create a Batman. And if you think you can reinterpret Batman, that's a new character. And so, listen, I agree with that. I see the fear. I agree with my brother's concerns. Anyway, I'm not going to get into where we disagree, but the bottom line is that it's a slow death. And when you're dying a slow death, there are blips of tremendous successes. So Avengers Endgame was a huge success. And so that is going to continue for a little bit longer. But ultimately, what's happening is that the Marvel, the universe, the cinematic universe, is starting to copy the comic book universe. And that's bringing it to its demise. My brother and I agree. Ralph and I agree. The only disagreement is, when will that demise take place? And can we reverse the trend? One last thing I'll say is, you're absolutely right. Neil Adams is right. It may be too late. Right now, if we were to go back to the original source material for the Hulk, that's a new character for a generation. It's a new character, because he hasn't existed in 20 years. Thor hasn't existed in 15 years. It's a new character. So they keep changing these characters. And every time you do, you lose that, I'm a fan of Thor. You change it, I'm off, somebody else comes in, but I'm off. And so they're diluting the character more and more. So I don't know if there's anything else more you'd like to say, guys. Certainly let us know what you think. Let us know if you agree or disagree. Certainly don't forget to like and subscribe. Give us your point of view. What's your experience reading comics? And what do you think, Kevin? Anything else?
Thanks for staying with us, folks. We really appreciate it. And I thank my partner, and I thank you all, because right now, at least for a couple of hours, my brain can relax based on what we just did.
Hey, guys, listen, we're trying to get to a goal of 50 subscribers. Help us. Call a friend, call somebody. And again, if you disagree, I think it's entertaining. I think this discussion is entertaining. It's certainly, again, it's certainly a different point of view. Everybody toes the line. I think we don't. And I think that's worth sharing. All right. Excelsior.
Take care, ladies and gentlemen.
Bye.